wake up with a little pleasant background noise. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a nice rest yesterday, and it wasn't too difficult to get up early again this morning. There are some new faces, so welcome. Very, very happy to have you. So this is the second day of our conference on the Greater Bay Area, and we continue our series of keynote speeches this morning from experts, from international experts on these issues. Now, our first speaker today is Professor Ray Forrest, who is professor here at Lingnan University, and some of you may know he's the director of a center that we have here at Lingnan on social policy and social change. Now, yesterday we had a demographer with us, we had a geographer with us, and Professor Ray Forrest would probably call himself more like an urban studies expert. It's urban sociology is the correct term. So it just shows you again that when we're talking about social policy, we're really dealing with an interdisciplinary subject that draws on ideas and theories from all kinds of disciplines. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Professor Ray Forrest, who will talk to us this morning about some recent research he did in Shenzhen, so something that most of us will very easily be able to relate to. Ray, please. Thanks.
Morning. So I'm not an expert on the Greater Bay Area, although it's such a huge area, I doubt if anybody's really an expert on all of it. But I do know something about Shenzhen. But I approach Shenzhen from, as Stefan said, a kind of interest, a broader interest in urban change, urban sociology, which may or not be central to your interests. But I hope that what I want to do is to paint a picture of why Shenzhen is particularly interesting in broader debates about the way the world is changing. And partly because the way cities are changing is very much focused on China, because China is the epicenter of urbanization and rapid urbanization. And Shenzhen has been seen as at the forefront of that change in Chinese urbanization. So what I want to do today is, we've started 10 minutes late already, so I'll try and be even, is to talk about Shenzhen in terms of these kind of ideas of cohesion, and in the Chinese context I'm not sure we still use the term harmony, I think it's gone out of usage now, but the ideas about what holds cities together, and in terms of urban life. And I'm not going to talk comprehensively about that, we've only got 30 minutes, but to tell you something about how these ideas resonate in somewhere like Shenzhen, and indeed how they link to broader debates. And this, I don't know whether most of you will know, my postdoc tells me he can tell me exactly, roughly, well, within a few years when that picture was taken. But because of that, he can date it. So it's about 1982, actually. And it's Shenzhen Avenue, as it was in 1982, which, due to that today, it would be unrecognizable. But I thought it was a nice evocative picture of just what's changed in 30 years. I went to Shenzhen when I first came to Hong Kong in 1987, and there was very little there. Right, so, city, the title is In the City of the Future. Here's a few kind of references to Shenzhen. Somebody called Cartier talked about a city without history. Here's a quote from an RT documentary. They have a saying in China, to see the country's past, go to Beijing, to see the country's present, go to Shanghai, and for the future, it has to be Shenzhen. Okay, then we've got something from Bloomberg, a video. Everything here moves at what's known as Shenzhen speed, an unyielding pace of change. And then finally, the spotlight is now on Shenzhen, the spectacular village turned tech hub as China continues to forge ahead, planning for the future. So that's the kind of discourse. You can come up with lots of quotes like that, but signaling and this idea that if the future of urbanization is anywhere, it's in Shenzhen. It was Chicago in 1880. It was, somebody said it was Los Angeles in 1980. Now it's Shenzhen. That's the kind of idea anyway. So that's why I've taken this kind of idea. And then the backcloth to this is the sociological backcloth, which may or may not, you might think, oh, not interested in that. But this is the kind of debates that you get in urban studies, urban sociology, or indeed broader discussions of urban change. One is that the idea that in the contemporary city, the city of mobility, apps, transience, artificial intelligence, that the traditional blocks of how we socialize in cities are disappearing. Okay? So the question is, have these traditional sites, the neighborhood, of conviviality, where we meet, where we talk to each other, how we get on with each other, have they kind of been displaced by these fleeting moments? So Instagram opportunities. We get our food delivered, we don't go out and socialize. So in other words, where we go, where we socialize are more individualized, or they're virtual, they're monetized, commodified. The world has changed. So the question that has preoccupied sociologists for actually about 100 years is, does the neighborhood still matter? And that's really partly what this is about, because a long lecture, but of course one of my arguments is that well, not my argument actually, it comes back to Robert Park, going back to Chicago in 1910. Neighborly contact's the basis for urban life, social cohesion, and this was recognized in mainland China when the urban world there began to change, when the Danwei system was transformed. How do we hold society together? How do we hold cities together? And the neighborhood again became the focus of attention, very much drawing, actually literally, from Robert Park's ideas. So there is a kind of legacy from Shenzhen to Chicago. It's a nice word, from Chicago to Shenzhen. It scans well. You see a paper there. So the point is, if urbanism is changing in some of the ways suggested, then you're going to see it in Shenzhen. If it's the city of the future, then you should see the kind of things that people are saying about the changing city life that we're facing. You should see it in somewhere like Shenzhen. So, to bring it down to earth a bit, then I'm going to draw on a study that we did. Well, we finished it last year in terms of the survey, and it's basically a survey of 1,000 residents in Shenzhen, face-to-face interviews in these 4 older inner urban districts. They're the original SEZ, actually, And the questions, some of the questions were, how do people who live in Shenzhen experience this place? What's it like to live there? Why these 4 districts, I won't say too much about, but a lot of the research on urban China tended to focus on urban villages, on kind of marginal groups in the cities. We wanted to focus on the mainstream, if you like. So it's a representative sample of people living in those 4 areas, which you can argue whether it's representative of Shenzhen, but it's more representative than some of the studies that have been done, which tend to focus on low-income migrants or whatever. Okay, so now I want to just go through a few kind of themes and topics, and essentially just give you some data. Sense of home and sense of belonging, which is, for those of you who know debates about Shenzhen, there's been a long discussion about, do people feel they're Shenzheners? How do we make people feel like this is home rather than where they came from? Because this is seen as important in terms of cohesion. So if we ask the question, yes. The other thing is just, as a background to that, Shenzhen is often referred to as exceptional. So when usually write a paper on Shenzhen, usually get a response saying, yeah, but Shenzhen's not like anywhere else, you know. Well, nowhere is like anywhere else, actually, at one level. If you begin, it depends on your level of abstraction. Shenzhen has always been seen as exceptional. Patterns of growth, migrant population, the size of the official versus the unofficial population, its economy, it was at the forefront. These are all debatable, but it's certainly exceptional as a city of renters. I've just written a paper, which some people didn't like very much, on is home ownership in Hong Kong, in China, really high, or is it socially constructed in all sorts of ways? Well, it certainly isn't high in Shenzhen. You can see, this is the census, the last census data from 2010. We obviously haven't got the next big census yet. You can see in 2010, Shenzhen is way out on the margins, 21%, compared to 85% is the census figure. And even in 2015, 26%. So you need to have that as background, because I think I'll come back to that. But in the scheme of things, Shenzhen is very unusual. So China may be a home ownership society, and that can be broken down, but Shenzhen is certainly a city of renters, which actually makes it more like many cities elsewhere in the world. Right, come back to that. So where's your home? If you ask people, where is your home? What you get is, if you're a homeowner, you're overwhelmingly likely to say, it's Shenzhen. Whereas if you're a renter, it's more likely to be place of birth. Now, we could drill down I haven't got time to drill down into the data. It relates obviously partly to how long people have lived in Shenzhen, but nonetheless, that pattern holds even if you control for length of residence and that sort of thing. So, place of birth. What's the best description of yourself? I'm a Shenzhener, 36%. We've got 6% who are local, so we assume that they were there before 1980. But you've got half who still say, I'm a temporary migrant worker. You may think that's high or low, and we can come back to that, but that's what you get. Then there's none of these, or never thought about it. But half still regard themselves as temporary migrant workers. What would make you feel more at home in Shenzhen? Well, going back to that initial thing, buy a property here. So that's what politicians and policymakers tend to believe, actually. If people buy a property, then it'll make them feel more at home. It'll make stake in the system, something that Carrie Lam is now promoting heavily. We've been doing that for years, and it hasn't really worked. It's not going to stop it maybe. But you see, there's a small group. Home will always be somewhere else. Fine, I still think home is Edinburgh, and always will, even though I haven't lived there for 40 years. But household registration, buy a property. That's what you might expect. But this, I think, does raise issues about policy. Then, okay, that's the city thing. What about neighbourhood? What's your sense of belonging to neighbourhood? The question is, do you have a strong sense of belonging to neighbourhood? Well, 41%, 14%, either very strong or strong. So that's more than half. Again, you might think that's high or low. But again, thinking about the city of the future, this kind of, this place of fluidity and transience, that seems quite high to me. I'd be kind of, if I was in Shenzhen government, I think, well, that's not too bad, Neighbouring and neighbourhood then. Let's pick up that. Do you know a lot of people in your neighbourhood? Again, think about your own experience. If I was asked that question in Hong Kong, right. Well, many, very many. So, half people again say they know many or very many people in the neighbourhood. Of course, again, what does know mean? If you ask how many do you know by name, that brings it down. But nonetheless, the simple answer to that question is many. Only 6% say hardly any. And thinking about, our sample has people who, some of them only lived there a year, some 20 years, but nonetheless, hardly any is quite, surprisingly low, I think. Then more specifically, these are questions that, again, some of you may not find this interesting, but some of these questions have been asked. The reason I use them is that they've been asked in different surveys in different societies for 30 or 40 years, so you can make comparisons. I visit neighbours in their homes. Well, that's less, 33%, but again, I think the background to that is I've always felt that that question asked in a Western context means quite different things because people have more space. I think certainly in Hong Kong, people have space to socialise with their neighbours, so it's unusual. But that seems quite high. If I needed advice about something, I could go to someone in my neighbourhood. Well, half the people we ask say, yes, I think I could go. And overall, you can see the overall pattern is the positives far outweigh the negatives. So there's relatively few in this category. I believe my neighbours would help me in an emergency. Only 2% obviously don't get on with their neighbours. So it's very low. We've got 60% say, yes, my neighbours would help me in an emergency. I borrow things. If you like, these questions are what sociologists regard as latent neighbouring. Things that might happen. If something happens to me, I could ask someone. This is more about active. I actually borrow things. And again, you've got almost half saying they borrow in exchange. That question, by the way, there is a question you can ask. Do you think you could ask your neighbours for $20? Or something like that. And then you get 95% saying no. So there's a limit to neighbouring. Anyway, I regularly stop and talk. Well, 50% regularly stop and talk. Again, that seems quite high to me. This links to, if some of you know your sociology, the idea that we've got strong ties and weak ties. And the neighbourly contact, the kind of, the casual hello in the lift, these things matter to us more than we think, actually. So, anyway, half the people seem to do that regularly. Then this one, neighbourhood attachment. Overall, I'm very attracted to living in this neighbourhood. 50%, I won't go through the whole lot. Because there's a bit of contradiction here that I'll come back to. Given, I feel I belong to this neighbourhood. 60% feel they belong to this neighbourhood. I mean, obviously all this translates into Chinese, and the word neighbourhood is a challenge, as you'll appreciate. But anyway, so you've got that, I feel I belong, and given the opportunity, I would move out, 34%. Now, maybe this 34% is the same group here, but actually there is a link between some people who say, I feel I belong, to those who say I would move out. And I'll come back to that. I plan to remain a resident in this neighbourhood for many years, about 70%, and yet they also say this. So there's stability, but also a potential fluidity about it. Then this one, the friendships and associations I have with other people in my neighbourhood mean a lot to me. So it's not just casual. If you say mean a lot to me, that's a lot. 77% or 67% say that. I don't think I would say that. Living in this neighbourhood, this is one thing that politicians are very keen on. Sense of community. Well, 60%. Oh, 53% say living in this neighbourhood gives me a sense of community. So I would take from that, that you can look at the other side and say, well, there's a lot of neutrals, but overall, it's a very kind of positive view of how people feel about their neighbourhood in Shenzhen. Then the question then, of course, is, and it goes back to, is it high or is it low? Because there's lots of studies, and the question is, well, how do we know it's high? How do we know it's low? The only way you can know if it's changing is to do this longitudinally. So there have been some studies in the USA which looked at, do people visit neighbours in their home? And what it shows is a decline, actually, over the last 40 or 50 years. But actually, recently it shows an increase. Okay. But what I've done here is just make some comparisons. We can make some comparisons with two other Chinese cities, Guangzhou, Hong Kong. We did some similar work in these two cities about 15 years ago, actually. So it's, time has passed, and Shenzhen time, a lot's changed in 15 years. Living in this neighborhood gives me a strong sense of community. Well, if you compare Shenzhen with Guangzhou and Hong Kong, well, Shenzhen kind of sits in the middle, actually. So, actually, Guangzhou at that time, you've got a kind of a higher percentage of people. I should say, without boring you with details, that the samples in Guangzhou and Hong Kong are a little bit different. They focused on 3 contrasting neighborhoods, whereas Shenzhen is a representative sample. So both Hong Kong and Guangzhou had a, if you like, a traditional old community in there, where you tend to get higher responses in terms of sense of community. So it may be, if these samples were the same as these, Shenzhen would be top. Anyway, that's that picture. Then you've got neighbouring. Well, this just, on a score of 1 to 5, it sort of compares the 3 cities. And there are some statistical differences, but by and large, there's not huge differences. But again, on most measures, Guangzhou comes at the top, Shenzhen second. So Hong Kong tends to be the least neighbourly city. And when I first came to Hong Kong, I was interested in this stuff. I said to people, do people care about neighbourhood in Hong Kong? They said, no. But actually, a lot more people do care than people believe when you ask the same question. But I think the message you get from this is, well, okay, the data from Shenzhen, you think, oh, that's quite high. You look at 2 other cities, it's not so exceptional, actually. But it may, thinking about Shenzhen as a place and a pace of change, compared to even Hong Kong, or Guangzhou, it may be surprising, I'll come back to that. All right, I've got 10 minutes, because I started 10 minutes late. Okay. Okay, so that's the sort of neighbouring, some basic data, then some comparison. Then I want to just finish on a few slides on what's it like to live there? So that's the kind of neighbourhood cohesion stuff. What's it like to live there? Quality of life. Now, there's a big literature that talks about world cities and what makes a city a world city. You've got to have good restaurants and cultural facilities and that kind of thing. If you ask people what matters to you in terms of quality of life, you can see it's air quality, way up on top. Second, income, which is less surprising. Good restaurants is pretty low down the priority, Good universities isn't very high either, actually. Be near friends and family is the next one. But again, it's way off those 2. That may be, I don't know, if you ask that question in, Europe, you might not get that same answer. It's partly contextualized. Although, we all know it's a big issue in this part of the world, so maybe it's less surprising. But, it is, for me, it's surprising just how insignificant some of these things seem relative to those. These are the things that really matter. Okay, money matters, clearly. Air quality. This one. Again, going back to this idea, what's happening to the cities? Well, people say they're vibrant, exciting down here. So what we did was we said to people, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, thinking about Shenzhen, where would you rate it? Where would you rate it? So you can see that busy, stressful, and expensive are the kind of dominant, that's on a scale of 1 to 10, that's where people score things highest. Again, you might not be surprised by that. Busy, stressful, expensive. It's not predictable. It's not routinized. It's friendly. So again, the way it's skewed, it's very much 5 and over on these, and some are obviously measuring different things. Exciting? Well, maybe. I was hoping you'd get much lower on predictable and higher on exciting. Like, this is an exciting, unpredictable place. But busy, stressful, expensive. I think we pretty all agree. Sorry, yeah?
Can you do this in Hong Kong?
No, I'm afraid I haven't, no. This is just for Shenzhen. If I had to live anywhere in the world, it would be Shenzhen. This is a statement. Do people agree with that? Well, yeah, it gets the kind of big thumbs up, you know. Strongly agree, or agree, you know, more than that, what? 60% of people saying that. Then what about, oh yes, this one. What about social class? This goes back to belonging. If you say to people, live in Shenzhen, where would you put yourselves in terms of social class? Well, people tend to gravitate towards the middle. I mean, there's cultural reasons that happens in many societies. Because people don't want to say I'm better than other people. But you can see, overwhelmingly, it's seen as people see themselves as middle class. With the next one, lower middle. Small number, upper middle. But, you know, so it's people see it as a middle class city. But then if you ask the question, I think this is the next slide, sense of belonging in relation to class, which is actually more interesting. The higher your social class, the stronger your sense of belonging to your neighborhood. And you get exactly, I can tell you this, you get the same relationship in Guangzhou, the same relationship in Hong Kong. Now this, I think, again, digging into sociology here, I think this is because when you ask people about their sense of belonging, they interpret it in different ways. So sociologists in the past have tended to think about traditional communities, right? I have a strong sense of belonging because I know lots of people in my neighborhood, because we share the same beliefs, we've lived together a long time, that kind of really romantic view of the old village, the small rural community, or the old established, inner city historical area, if you like. Now, one interpretation of this is that when you say to people, now, do you have a strong sense of belonging? Perhaps they're saying, yes, I feel I belong in this kind of place. I feel that I'm middle class, I should live in this kind of place, So it's a sense of belonging to the kind of neighborhood they're living in, and that's partly explains why people can say I have a very strong sense of belonging, but then you say, would you think about moving somewhere else? They also say yes, because they've got an even stronger sense of belonging to that kind of place. So they're living in, I don't know, in Hong Kong, Taikoo Shing, but they could have an even stronger sense of belonging if they move to Repulse Bay. I belong there even more. So I think there's complications around that, but nonetheless, it does show an interesting relationship, and indeed that links to income as well. Actually, in the Shenzhen sample, if doctors, lawyers, professors have a higher sense of belonging than people who work in hotels and city of the future. Then go back to the title at the top. Is it the city of the future? Well, strongly agree. If you ask people in Shenzhen, do you feel that Shenzhen is the city of the future? Well, hardly anybody disagrees strongly. Not many people disagree. Now, so some reflections on this. I think there's kind of some policy reflections and some kind of more kind of theoretical ones. I think one thing is that asking the question, well, does neighborhood still matter? Let's take Shenzhen. This is the city of the future. This is a city that's being transformed dramatically in 30 years. A city of migrants. Even in this place, these traditional sites of socializing, they seem to remain pretty resilient, actually. And I think that's partly because social scientists like change. I mean, they're fixated by dramatic change. So it's much easier to get a paper published that is saying, things have changed dramatically, than if you're saying, well, things are pretty much the same as they were. It doesn't sound very interesting. But the reality is, and there have been studies of social life during war or major disruptions, and what they find is that life goes on. People still get up in the morning, they go to work, they come home, they go to bed, they get. So most of our lives are quite routinized, quite mundane. And I think that's true of somewhere like Shenzhen. There's the discontinuities. It is an exciting, vibrant place. There's also the continuities, the kind of fairly routinized things. The neighborhood still matters. It's also a city of migrants. I mean, okay, some of the migrants have been there for 30, 40 years, but most people still come from somewhere else, and most people haven't been there that long. Now, again, there have been studies of new towns. The thing about new towns is everybody is in the same boat. It's not like an old established city where migrants arrive and then there's all these locals who say, oh, we don't like these people. No, we're locals and they're non-locals. In Shenzhen, there are very few locals and a lot of non-locals. So that actually helps cohesion. You know, people don't feel